Right. I do not see anybody in the attendees list, so good evening. My name is Brendan Salisbury. I am the staff liaison for this multiple member bodies review committee. This is the inaugural meeting of the Review of Multiple Member Bodies Committee. I'll start by saying that pursuant to Chapter 2 of the Acts of 2025, this meeting of the Review of Multiple Member Bodies Committee will be conducted via remote participation. We'll post an audio recording, audio-video recording, transcript, or other comprehensive record of these proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting on the City of Somerville website and local cable access government channels. As this body does not yet have a presiding officer, I will be presiding briefly, and so I will first give a call of the roll. So this is roll call to establish quorum. Liaison Broderick. Councillor Klingon. Chris Dwan.
Here.
Derek Rice.
Here. Here.
Clerk Wells.
Here.
All right, with 3 members present and 2 absent, we do have quorum. As I noted, this is the inaugural meeting of the Review of Multiple Member Bodies Committee. This was a body that was established by Section 8.6 of the new city charter to conduct a review of the city's 44 multiple member bodies and produce recommendations for the creation, combination, dissolution, or other disposition of those bodies. The charter did require the establishment of this body by ordinance. The ordinance does set a timeline for a final report, including all the recommendations of this body, I believe at the first meeting of December. And so we have a lot of work to do and shockingly little time to do it in. So with that being said, I will move us to the first order of business, which is the election of a presiding officer. Are there nominations? Mr. Rice.
My apologies. I'd be very excited to nominate Chris Dwan, if you will accept.
I do.
I'll second that nomination.
I actually, Clerk Wells, if I may ask a procedural question, as you are the expert on this, given that all members involved have voted on this,
We still need a vote. We still need a vote.
All right. In that case, I will ask Chris Dwan, who do you vote for as chair?
I am curious if there are any other nominations, but given what was just said, yes.
I will take that as a vote for yourself.
Yes.
Derek Rice, who do you vote for?
I vote for Chris Dwan.
Clerk Wells, who do you vote for?
Chris Dwan.
All right. Chris Dwan has been elected as the chair of this committee, so I will turn the reins over to him.
Thank you so much. That was the most flattering thing that's happened to me in a while. Thanks, everybody. I'm really thrilled to be here. I'll just indulge and say I am super excited that we have this body and that we have an opportunity to go through. I feel pretty well informed, and I couldn't list off 20 multi-member bodies. I am super excited for the presentation. A little tiny bit out of order. Does anybody in attendance, anybody within the reach of my voice, have preferences for how we run these meetings? I am open to being very structured. I am open to being more conversational. My instinct is usually to be conversational and to use the sort of Robert's Rules structure when necessary to maintain control. If anybody's uncomfortable with that, we can be much more structured. Kim Wells.
Thank you so much. Okay, I will say I fully support that plan with that slight exception that you just saw there, where I do think it is important that the chair sort of recognizes who is speaking. But once that is in place, I think this type of work lends itself really well to conversation, and we would likely be doing ourselves a disservice if we tried to be too rigid about our format. So I thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the inquiry.
Completely agreed. I will just procedurally, I don't plan to do the formalism of asking people to address each other through the chair. That feels very strange and stilted for such a small group. If it becomes necessary, something has gone wrong earlier in the process. Mr. Rice.
Yeah, I think I'll agree with the sentiment there, and also echo a preference for having the one mic passed by the chair to people and then passed back to the chair for them to pass as appropriate. I also have trust in the chair's ability to use their discretion to acknowledge people in an order that makes sense based on what past conversation has been and how much time and energy has been taken up by past speakers. I don't know enough about the details of Robert's rules to know if that is an adaptation or if that is within bounds, but that is what I would suggest and support.
Excellent. And I will mention, I do see one attendee, Johnny Wade is the name there. If you would like to be recognized, please feel free to raise your hand. My plan is to kind of keep it to the committee here for our conversations, but if there is something relevant to the discussion at hand, please raise your hand. If your comments are brief, you're totally welcome to participate, but I do need to keep it on track for us to get through this mighty list of bodies. And with that, I would suggest we move on to the presentation by staff. I'm fascinated by what I'm about to learn.
Mr. Chair, give me one moment. I'm just going to move screen sharing over to Emily to manage the presentation.
Can we move it over to Mihika?
I will do that instead then.
Thank you.
Also, just to confirm, I am going to be screen sharing from the presentation slides or the PDF slides.
Whichever is your preference, I think is fine.
Thank you.
I apologize. I'm just trying to figure out how to end screen sharing.
Procedurally, really, I apologize. Procedurally, are we going to publish minutes of these meetings?
Yes.
Okay. Who is taking the notes and publishing the meetings, the minutes?
I am currently taking notes.
Okay. And then I saw Kim Wells point to herself as the person who's going to publish them. Where are we going to publish them and on what timeline and that stuff?
That's an excellent question. We are aiming to publish them as soon as possible. We're thinking 5 to 7 days feels realistic, but certainly before the next time that this body meets. I will work with the liaison to make sure that all of those processes are in place so that it doesn't rely on me, but it is really on the clerk's office to make sure that that happens. Hence the self-referential gesture there.
Okay. I will just mention that I started off pretty allergic to the automatic transcription features that are available in Zoom these days. I am less allergic now based on acclimation, I suppose, but I think we are not terribly well served by just a transcript. So my instinct is not, informative summarizations, but quoting exactly my rambling back to me in the minutes is not, I don't think it's terribly helpful. I'm sure I trust your judgment on that, but like short minutes are good. And with that, I will turn it back over. I see the presentation before us.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. I am going to just make sure that I'm able to see this. I hope this is visible, and I'm now understanding that my screen might be showing multiple things at once.
We see the presentation. What we see, I think, is correct.
Okay, perfect. All right, I am going to get us started. I want to take a minute to introduce myself and give Emily a second as well. My name is Mihika Goge. I am a project assistant at with the City Council, and Emily and I have been working on this for a very, very long time since we started at these positions, and we're very excited to share some of the information that we found as we get into it and as we break down the order of the slides and as the order of what we're going to be presenting on. We'll also give a little bit more information on the structure of this because we understand there are definitely going to be questions. We will touch on that in a second, but I'll pass it over to Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Lopez Touche. I'm the other project assistant for the City Council. As Mika mentioned, we've been working on this since October about. So we've collected a lot of information. We'll get into the table of contents, but just as a preview, want to get through the process, then we'll take questions on that before moving forward. So expect that. But with that, I think we can get started.
Perfect. So as this is our introductory meeting, it is going to follow a little bit of a different layout than usual. We are going to be starting off by really delving into the background, a little bit of our process and the question that is being asked of you all, and in general, what the foundation of your decision making will really look like. Due to time, we do ask that you hold your questions until a little bit of the end of the presentation. If these do come up in the moment, please feel free to note them down, or if it works. I don't know how this the system or the setup for this would really work, but if it's easier to put them in chat, we can go back to it after. But we do ask that all questions are held until that point. To give a little bit of an overview of what we're going to be covering, we're going to start off by looking at the legislation and basically providing the foundation of why you are all here. We will then go over what exactly multiple member bodies are in Somerville, how they're defined. Then we'll go into some of the considerations for review, the evaluation process and the criteria from our end, what our data collection looked like and the analysis, and then the timeline for these meetings to basically hit our report by December. We will then take some time for questions, and we're happy to spend as much or as little time as we need at that point. We will then start off by looking at our preliminary findings. I do also want to ask a quick procedural question. From my understanding, we are missing a couple of the members of the committee, but I believe that is still enough to vote on, or at least make a decision on certain bodies. Is that correct?
So far as we're unanimous, my understanding is it is a majority of the seats, not a majority of the people present.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And then so we will go ahead and give you all time to discuss the bodies and our recommendations at that point, or our findings at that point. And then the last slide will basically cover our discussion on when the next meeting should be and an overall idea of how we should proceed with this review.
Okay. So we will begin by reviewing the ordinance that created this committee for the review of multiple member bodies. The ordinance outlines the responsibilities and timeline of the committee. The committee is charged with providing a report to the City Council no later than December 3rd of this year, as Brendan mentioned. Importantly, this report will include an assessment of the functions and relevancies of the city's current multiple member bodies, a review of the activities of these bodies in recent years, and recommendations for combining, terminating, or establishing new multiple member bodies in the city. The recommendations outlined in this report will be voted on by the City Council in the form of a resolution and will not be binding.
All right, we want to start off by understanding exactly how many bodies there are. So currently there are 38 active boards, commissions, and committees in the city of Somerville. This is exactly what we are using to describe multiple member bodies. The two categorizations that we've kind of put aside for multiple member bodies, or the two ways that we've divided them, is the types of bodies and the establishment of bodies. There is going to be a little bit more nuance to this, and there's also going to be a lot of crossover between these two kinds. But for right now, we will go and start delving into each of these a little bit more. The types of bodies are either adjudicatory, advisory, or ad hoc. And the establishment of these bodies has either come from a local ordinance or from the Massachusetts general laws, which we will just refer to as MGL. So adjudicatory bodies, I'm going to give a second for everyone to read through these bodies as well, but I want to share a quick definition. A definition of an adjudicatory body is made up of neutral officials who, after the presentation of evidence or argument, render a judgment affecting a party's interests in a particular matter. It's important to understand that this judgment that they are rendering is either enforceable in some capacity, it is binding in some capacity, or it basically has some kind of impact on the city operations or whatever area of work the body is involved in. As you're reading through these, you might see that there's a pretty big variety of exactly what these bodies cover, everything from housing to the environment to health. The thing that really makes all of these bodies similar is the fact that their decisions mean something. They are actually enforceable in some way, and they have a direct impact on something. It doesn't really matter what the topic that they specifically cover is, but I will give everyone a second to look through these. All right. Advisory bodies. I think that this would be the best way to understand it would be that these are organizations composed of appointed members whose primary purpose is to provide advice, study critical issues, and facilitate communication between elected officials and the community. They do not have the authority to make decisions or directly implement policies, but they serve to inform or consult on matters that affect the community.
One thing I'll point out for advisory bodies, sorry, really quickly, you see an asterisk next to traffic board. Just to clarify why it's there, traffic board is a bit of a unique case. It serves the dual purpose of being available to the traffic commission for advice and consultation with respect to its activities, but it also has the duty of holding public hearings and votes on appeals to traffic commission decisions. So that's why it's there, but we think that it's best suited to be placed within the advisory body category.
Absolutely.
Okay. Okay. And lastly, ad hoc bodies. So ad hoc bodies are those created to work on a specific subject or problem and are dissolved upon completing its work or fulfilling its function. These bodies are not legislated through MGL or a city ordinance, which is different from the advisory, adjudicatory bodies. These ad hoc bodies will be discussed later in the review process, but we're including them today for review purposes. One possible action to keep in mind later in the process when we address these bodies is that ad hoc bodies are bodies that you can potentially properly establish, which effectively would create a new multiple member body in the city. But we'll talk a little bit more about possible recommendations in following slides.
All right, the next categorization is where these bodies have originated from. So we will understand that the only two places that they can come from are either Massachusetts general law or from local ordinances. But there's a little bit of nuance as to what the MGL ordained constituted bodies really mean and what they require. So all the bodies on this list are required by MGL for one of two reasons. They either have state jurisdiction or they have a state presence and state authority over municipal activities, or they are required in the city. The reason that they are required in the city can be because of a number of things, but bodies marked with the asterisks are required because of distinct characteristics. So two examples I'm going to look at right now is the planning board and I will say the board of library trustees. So the planning board is required in the city because MGL requires any city that has or town that has a population over 10,000 to create a planning board. Obviously, Somerville fits that limitation or fits that scope. And so they are required to create a planning board. The board of library trustees, you are required to have a board if you have a publicly funded or publicly appropriated library in your city. We will delve a lot deeper into where each of these bodies kind of come from and why they are required and exactly what the legislation says once we go through each of them individually in next meetings. But all of these slides will be available to you at the end of the meeting, and all of them are linked within this as well. So you have a chance to look through some of the enabling legislation yourself. The other kind of MGL body are those that have been accepted. These are bodies that originate from the Massachusetts general laws or their original legislation is found within it. We do also have those that have both a local ordinance and a Massachusetts general law, but ultimately those that are accepted are ones that the city has chosen to adopt. So the city has chosen to allow the bodies to be created under the regulations and guidelines that are laid out by MGL. Bodies marked by the asterisks are legislated only through MGL, and all other bodies have a legislation in both the MGL and the Code of Ordinances here in Somerville. I will note that the only two bodies that have both of these on this list are the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and the Veterans Commission on Monuments, Memorials, and Dedications. Right now it's just written as the Veterans Commission. What's important to understand in both of these is that they have some kind of addition that still fits into the broad guidelines that are laid out by MGL with the Affordable Housing Trust. They've added an amendment recently with the Veterans Commission. They have specified a little bit more about its application in Somerville. But all in all, these are all mostly constituted by state law.
And I see there's a hand raised. I didn't know if we wanted to wait to address that or if that was something that was pressing.
I'm just real quick. Are there bodies that are potentially created by state law that the city has not yet adopted?
We will definitely touch on that later. What I will say is we'll try and keep the questions and the responses to the end of the presentation, but I will definitely note that down as something we will look into. But this is right now what the review of these bodies has been asked to do is look at those that are currently in Somerville. And that is kind of what the scope of the review from the legislation is as well. But yes, there are bodies that MGL discusses that the city might not have necessarily adopted as of late, but that's not something that you as review members are being asked to look at, or committee members are being asked to look at. You're being asked to look at those that are specifically in the city.
All right, thank you.
Never.
Right, and this next slide is fairly self-explanatory, but these are the bodies that are established through Somerville's Code of Ordinances. So linked here, we'll go straight either to this Code of Ordinances or in one case to Somerville's zoning ordinance. So it'll take a second to look, but there isn't too much else to say here. It's pretty straightforward.
Right. So we're going to take a second to go through what is being asked of you in this review. This is something that has obviously been laid out in the legislation that we previously looked at in the Code of Ordinances with the creation of this committee, but everything that you do falls under 4 big buckets: creation, combination, amendments, or termination, or to dissolve. We will delve into this a little bit deeper as we look at actual bodies and our findings of them so far, but these are just some considerations that we in our research have been looking at when we ask, where do each of these apply? So when it comes to something like creating a body, the 2 areas are either creating a new body to address gaps in the city. I will say that, as Emily previously mentioned, the proper establishment of an ad hoc body or the creation of some kind of official ordinance for it does fall under this bucket of a new body. The other option is to reinstate bodies that are on hold. We don't have a ton like this in the city, but when we get to each of them, we will look at them a little bit deeper. The next area of work is to combine bodies. In our research, a big thing that we have been looking at is where overlaps and gaps exist. So combination looks at multiple member bodies that fulfill the same purposes as other multiple member bodies. It's very important to look at exactly what these purposes are and if it is the same essential function as another multiple member body. Next, with amendments, your choices for recommendations are to either limit or expand the scope of powers that a body has, to reassess the composition or the meeting structure. So that's either the number of members or maybe who is part of the member, what is required of membership. And then the last option with amendments is to explicitly define the relationship between the body and the city. As we go through these bodies, you will come to realize that there are a lot of areas where sometimes it feels that there are some actions that are being maybe duplicated in both the city functions and the body's function. I think it's important to understand exactly what the purpose of the creation of the body is when looking at whether it should be amended to further define what either the relationship is between the body or the city, or to explicitly state what their duties are. The final option is to dissolve a body. And the 3 places where a body can be dissolved, or the 3 situations a body can be dissolved, is 1, when bodies haven't met in years or they are inactive, bodies that no longer serve the needs of the city or they're defunct, and bodies that fulfill the exact same responsibilities as city departments, so they're completely redundant. We also are going to be asking which bodies are subject to review. So I've put these categorizations into 3 areas that we have described as to where bodies originate from: those that are MGL mandatory, those that are MGL accepted, and COO is Code of Ordinances. Those that have been created by local ordinance. For the MGL mandatory bodies, the city must establish certain bodies, as we said, if they fall under state jurisdiction or they are required due to the city's characteristics. These bodies are not subject to review, but we believe that these are still very important to look at and consider. They also form a very important information base for the background of how bodies operate in the city. But all in all, because most of the jurisdiction for these bodies comes from the state level, there isn't really much we can do as a municipal committee to alter these bodies in major ways. The next bucket is MGL accepted bodies. These are bodies that are established only through MGL. The two ways that they can be altered is that they can either have their powers specified through an ordinance, as we have seen with two of the MGL accepted bodies. It's important to note that this local ordinance must still fit within the guidelines if it is to just be specified or to be amended through an ordinance. It needs to still fit the overall guidelines of the state. If there are going to be significant changes to either the purpose, the duties, or the powers of the body, the recommendation is to submit a home rule petition. That is a requirement because having accepted or adopted the body within the city of Somerville, the city has ultimately adopted all of the guidelines that come with it. If there's going to be any major changes, a home rule petition needs to be submitted. Finally, with those that have been made through local ordinance, they're fair game. The city has made the rules, the city can change the rules. These bodies can be created, consolidated, or combined, amended, or terminated.
Okay, and now moving forward to the evaluation process and criteria. This will give you a little bit of insight to the work that we have been doing in researching and analyzing data for these bodies. So prior to beginning data collection or drafting questionnaires, we reviewed publicly available information about each body. This included each body's enabling legislation at the city and/or state level, as well as any governing documents. We also reviewed the city's website and Legistar to learn more about the body's current and past work and contributions to the city. Let's see. And after completing our preliminary research, no, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So after completing preliminary research, we developed two questionnaires. The first is tailored to liaisons and the second to commissioners. Questions were organized according to the following groups that you can see on the screen: purpose, current work, alignment to city goals, in the commissioner's case, overlaps and gaps across and between bodies, collaboration with city staff, and additional information. These categories were influenced by the stated goals in the city charter and the code of ordinances, which we reviewed earlier, and also the results of our own research. These questions were then reviewed by and approved by the city clerk and the assistant city clerk before moving forward.
We'll now go into how these interviews were conducted and the groups that they were divided into. So multiple member bodies, as there are 38 active ones, were divided into 12 groups. These groups were split by similarities in either work or in function. They sound kind of similar, so I will explain them a little bit further in the next slide. But each of these groups, so of the 12, we split these evenly between the interviewers, being Emily and I. So Emily conducted 6 of the group interviews. I conducted 6 of them. Most interviews were conducted in these groupings. There were a few outliers when people's scheduling didn't work, but by conducting them in these groups, we were able to assess them compared to each other as well. So these are examples of how the groups were either split by related work or by related functions. So if we look at group 1, we see we have the Planning Board, Urban Design Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, Historic Preservation Commission. This is mostly PPC and the work that they do. So as we can see, all of this work is dependent on each other. It is directly related to each other, even though the kinds of boards that they are or the power that they have, whether they're adjudicatory or advisory, is a little bit different. As for Group 11, we have the Arts Council Board, the Board of Library Trustees, the Council on Aging, and the Bicycle Advisory Committee. Of course, there's a large array of work being done, everything from seniors to bicycle safety in the city, but ultimately these all operate as advisory bodies and serve somewhat of a similar function as to what they contribute to the city through their programs or their services.
And once our questionnaires and these groupings were completed, we established a 2-part interview strategy. In the first phase of interviews, we focused on staff liaisons, conducting our interviews through Zoom. In the second phase, we will focus on commissioner questionnaires, which will be sent as a Microsoft form. Commissioners were selected with the guidance of the staff liaisons that we interviewed in our first phase of interviews, with the goal of identifying the commissioner who can best answer the questionnaire and speak to the functions and impacts of the body that they serve on. It's important to note that at this point, we have finalized our first phase of interviewing. So all of our liaison interviews have been completed, and we are looking to move into our second phase, which is the commissioner questionnaires.
We're now going to take a chance to look at our data, both the collection and how we have analyzed it.
Okay. So our data analysis findings and conclusions are grounded in the direct responses of the city liaisons and commissioners of each body. For liaisons, this data was collected by generating transcripts of the recorded Zoom interviews that we conducted. This transcript is then cleaned and coded, which is a process that Mahika will touch on in the next slide. And any interviewer notes that Mahika and I took are really just supplemental to that video recording and audio transcript. For commissioner questionnaires, this will look a little bit different, but we will still have recorded answers to reflect and analyze through the Microsoft Forms that will collect those responses for us. And then we can then go back and analyze.
To look at data analysis, I'm going to very briefly touch on this. If you do have any further questions, you are welcome to come to either Emily or I with them. Brendan is also, he has access to all of our Excel sheets that we've been using, and he's happy to answer questions as well. I don't want to speak for him, but I'm going to assume yes. The two ways that we are looking at analysis is quantitatively and qualitatively. So with all of the quantitative data, it's pretty straightforward. A lot of our questions were either yes or no questions, multiple choice questions, or questions about using the Likert scale. What that is any question that measures attitudes or perceptions. So liaisons were often asked if they were to agree or strongly disagree with a certain statement. And all of these questions, the yes or no, the ABC, or the Likert scale, were assigned a number, yes being 1, no being 2, and so on. These responses were then all logged into Excel sheets. We do have different places that we store our commissioner data and our liaison data. And all of this information is both assessed within the groups that we interviewed people in and also on a question by question basis. So with the quantitative data, it's fairly straightforward. With the qualitative data, we start off by doing a direct comparison to the enabling legislation. We basically cross-checked some pretty standard values, things like the purpose of the body's creation, their duties, at times their meeting structure, their member composition, anything that really was duplicated across all of these enabling legislations. As you start reading through them, you will see that they all follow a very similar format. We then compared this directly to interview data. So specific phrases that we're saying that liaison said that covered things like the purpose of the body's creation, their powers, their rights and responsibilities, and any limits. The next part of it was qualitatively coding the data. What we had done with this is that we went through every single one, and we are still in the process of doing this. We have gone through every single one of these transcripts and highlighted any themes or any phrases that pop out on a question by question basis. As we continue comparing these to each other, we see certain themes emerge more often than others, and we see basically what is working and what's not. At the base level, what we're looking at is overlaps or any gaps in the body's work, which is, of course, falling under duplicated work efforts. The main goal with qualitatively coding this information is to quantify the qualitative responses. It's a lot easier to share our findings when we can put a number behind it. And we see that best when we have established frequency. Any information that doesn't fall under the quantitative lens that is from the transcript is especially important because it kind of provides an outlier or an anomaly. And this helps to give very body-specific information, something that might not be seen across a lot of different bodies.
Okay, and now moving forward into the committee timeline. As was mentioned at the beginning, there's a December deadline for submitting and having the city council review this report. So it's kind of a quick turnaround in terms of the bulk of the work that we have ahead of us. So today's meeting is really just meant to review the work that has been done so far, for collecting data for the review of multiple member bodies and understand this process for the work moving forward. The next 6 months from May to October will focus on discussing active multiple member bodies and arriving at preliminary recommendations based on data collected from liaisons and commissioner questionnaires, the enabling legislation, and the needs of the city. This timeline shows November is being dedicated to the production and submission of the committee's report. The deadline for this has been set to November 13th of this year. This deadline takes into account the submission requirements and also the Thanksgiving holiday, being realistic about when we can be most productive during that month. And lastly, as mentioned in the ordinance, that December 3rd deadline for presenting the final report with recommendations to the City Council. I do think it's important to note here that while the December deadline is very strict and today's meeting is set, and that November 13th deadline is also fairly strict, what happens between then, and somebody can correct me if I'm wrong, is really going to be guided by this body and the rate at which progress is being made, and I think can adapt depending on the members of this body. So what seems to be the best fit. So I sort of broadly defined it as time when these bodies are going to be discussed and preliminary recommendations are going to be made, but that's really up to you all.
All right, we are going to take a moment to look into our preliminary findings. I will say that the next slide shows a very clear breakdown of what's being asked of you all, and we're happy to do this. We also want to say that these bodies are all very straightforward for the most part. You will not be asked to do a lot of deep dive into these because actually Emily and I haven't been able to do a lot of deep dive into these. I will touch on why in just a moment. So,
can I just, sorry.
Absolutely.
I just wanted to flag, I think we're going to take questions on general process in case we needed to clarify anything before moving forward into preliminary findings.
Absolutely. And I'm going to stop screen share, I guess I'm still screen sharing.
The screen share is a little bit odd right now. I see X's and squares and a sort of sandwich with the word notes next to it. There we go. I guess I will start off and ask, what is the expectation of staff support on this committee's work? Kind of how much of an FTE are we expected to have over the next 3/4 of a year?
Absolutely. I will definitely let Brendan speak on this a little bit as well, but I do have to be fully transparent about something. I am actually only going to be at this meeting today. I have actually accepted another position within the city, so I will still be around, but I will not be assisting in this area as much. As for Emily and I, though, we have left a lot of information as to exactly where to go in this process, and it is my understanding that Brendan will be assisting with a lot of the continued research and questions about specific committees as they are being discussed.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I will jump in to confirm what Mahika has said, including the fact that we will miss her terribly because I don't enjoy qualitative coding very much. The background as a statistician, unfortunately. To answer some of the question that you didn't actually really ask, but I will give you some advance notice of this. The way that I am planning to compile the report basically at this point is at each of these meetings, you will have the opportunity to make these preliminary recommendations, and I am recording those as we go through. So, for instance, I will spoil something that Mahika and Emily have coming for you, which is that there are 6 inactive or defunct bodies, which you will be able to review tonight. And if the body chooses to make recommendations on those 6, those will be recorded. And then at the end of this process, there will be a final vote to sort of accept the final recommendations or accept the preliminary recommendations of the body as a final set of recommendations for a report to be submitted to the City Council. It will be my role in November to produce that report, and that is part of why I am doing as much of this work in advance as you work through this as I can, because I do, of course, have other duties for the City Council. So I hope that answers your question. I obviously am, of course, available outside of these meetings for general staff support if you have questions about the research process or about logistics for upcoming meetings and things like that, as I am the staff liaison and will be here to assist with that.
All right, that's really good to know. Before going to Mr. Rice, I will just say that I've been on committees and commissions where the expectation is that the commissioners don't do very much work besides making decisions and voting. And I've been in other ones where we drafted and provided a substantial amount of research support. And I am very comfortable given the broad remit, like it is a fairly broad remit. I am personally comfortable jumping into draft and to participate in research and not just listen to reports delivered by, it sounds like, not really any dedicated staff time, but everybody's going to do their best. I think it would probably work best if the people on the committee who have the time are able to chip in a little bit. So that is to say, I don't expect you, Brandon, to write the entire report solo and merely come to us for decisions. Mr. Rice, you are muted, my friend.
You haven't, I will get used to that. You haven't left me much to say. Although you did sort of make an inference there that I'd love to get an explicit clarification on. In terms of city staff capacity, if we identify like research that would be valuable to us, like what capacity exists for city staff to be the workhorse of having that research happen going forward?
I will admit that's a difficult question to answer in the hypothetical, simply because to some extent it does depend on what the research is and the extent of that would be required of me. That being said, given the very time sensitive nature of this work, it is a priority for I mean, it's mandated by the charter, so it is a very high priority. And so, to the extent possible, I will be dedicating every available moment of my time that is required for this work to this work. And certainly, while we are losing Mahika, we will still have Emily available. And this is also certainly a priority for her as well. Again, given the sort of time sensitive nature of it.
I saw Kim Wells next.
Thanks. Yeah, just to tack on to that, and I think actually combine those comments. I think the answer is where we are going to land is a combination of things where the liaison will help guide us in terms of what is the best way to accomplish getting the information that we as a committee are looking for. The answer might be that one of the committee members takes on the responsibility of doing the research and the homework and has a remit to bring back for the subsequent meeting. The answer might be that staff are going to do that research. I think a lot of that will be sort of question dependent. I don't think the work entirely lands on the liaison, but the work of the liaison is to help us plan how the work gets done. So that just sort of, if we can tie a bow on it, I hope that that helps us do that.
That sounds great. And Mika.
Absolutely. I also just want to chip in and echo that and say that there is space, of course, at the end of our presentation to really let you all decide on what process is going to work the best. And I will say that this is definitely, given the timeline and the speed of having to move forward with this, there will be a little bit of an ask in, I think, having either one committee member or all of you, if that is appropriate, to at the very least have a little bit of a background before certain findings are presented in the subsequent meetings. It really isn't too much that is being directly asked. And I will also say that so far, all of our research or all of our data has been collected on the liaison side of things. It is being actively analyzed and is in that process right now, as you will see in the next slides. But I think this is a great time to also really consider what that looks like, especially given the committee timeline. So I will say that maybe in the last slide, Emily, if that's okay, where the next meeting is being discussed, there can also kind of be a breakdown of what the ask is for committee members.
Yes.
Okay.
Just as a process check, I got an invite that was taking us for 2 hours on this meeting. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. Would it be okay if we took a look at the ordinance? Because I find myself curious just to share. I want to share a window, not a document, application window. Yeah, that. So this is, I believe, the ordinance that created this committee, where the charter required us to have an ordinance, and so an ordinance was passed. And Here we are, we did this, we have these people, and I see that we have a report that in addition to the recommendations, there are three other things here. The first is an assessment of the functions and relevancies of the system city's current multiple member bodies. So while I am happy to go through the structured process that we kind of walked through, looking at each and recommending combine, terminate, or establish, I also want to make sure that we do that assessment. The review of activities, it sounds like we're well underway to determining some have not met in a while, others are quite active and have minutes. And the ability of the city to fill appointments to the body, I haven't heard anything about. I expect that'll come out over the course of the year. But there's more, I think there's more than just the recommendations to our job here. Brennan.
Yes, Mr. Chair, that is well noted. I would like to highlight that basically 1 and 2 are what Mahika and Emily have been working on. So a lot of that information is going to be condensed into presentations that are going to be delivered to you over the course of the next 6 months. And so the basically the findings that they are going to present to you are going to be incorporated into the final report. The primary function of this body is to sort of review that information and make those determinations and those recommendations. And so basically what I'm trying to say here is we have done 1 and 2 largely at this point. 3 is one that is a little bit more focused, I think, on the creation of new bodies. There is, of course, going to be some evaluation of existing bodies' ability to meet quorum and difficulty with filling those seats, but that was largely incorporated into the review in 1 and 2. And so if this body were intent on creating a new body, then certainly a separate evaluation of the city's ability to fill appointments to that body would be required.
That makes sense to me. And this will be a conversation. I just want to be sure that we do the job that is asked of us. And then in the spirit of doing the job that is asked of us, I note that Section 8.4 says that all multiple member bodies need a vice chair. So I would suggest that we might go ahead and do that as well. If it is in order to go backwards, I would open it up to nominations for a vice chair for this body.
I'll go ahead and nominate Derek Rice as vice chair.
I would second that. All right.
I will accept it if that's a thing that I need to say.
I think that we need a roll call vote. I will ask Kim Wells.
My vote is for Derek Rice.
And Mr. Rice.
My vote is for Derek Rice.
And I also vote for Derek Rice. So we have done our municipal job there. Congratulations. Those were the points that I wanted to take out of order. I'm going to try to find the button where I can stop sharing.
I did have one question still related to the first half of the presentation, if I can jump in.
Absolutely. I'm still trying to stop sharing, but please.
Sure. I'm going all of the bodies which you displayed and you categorized in different ways, are all of them subject to open meeting law, or are some not? In particular, the ad hoc bodies, I'm wondering if those are not.
I'm happy to answer this one, or if Kim wants to hop in on this as well. But yes, they should be. That is the response, is that every established body is subject to open meeting law, and that is a requirement as a multiple member body. As we will see as we go through our findings, that is not always the case in the actual administering or the work of the body, but I'll let Kim answer.
Yeah, if I may, to correct that, ad hoc bodies are not, in fact, subject to the open meeting law. Ad hoc bodies are designed to explicitly be advisory to an individual, right? That the ad hoc nature of them is that there is sort of a thing that they do to again, to help someone else make a decision. And oftentimes those are not subject to the open meeting law. In Somerville, many times they operate that way, right? Because we do value transparency and accessibility, but that is not an explicit requirement of the open meeting law.
Thank you for the thorough answer. Appreciate that.
I actually have a question since we're here. This is great, by the way. Thank you so much for all the preparation so we can jump right into this. I am looking at the PDF and the racial and social justice working groups. Where would they fit in this framework? Like the public safety for all process.
Emily, if you want to touch on this a little bit more too, because I know that you specifically looked at RSJ, and the RSJ bodies, but I will say broadly with any of the bodies that have working groups or that have subcommittees within their body, that is something that will be looked at as we go through individual bodies. Broadly, that is not as much part of it is, I guess the best way to explain it is it falls under the umbrella of assessing the overall body if there are working groups within the body.
Okay, because I don't see even at a top level on the list that they would be ad hoc, either advisory or ad hoc. And I don't see any of them.
If I
Sorry.
may,
Yeah, go ahead.
with you using public safety for all as the example, my understanding is that the work of that body is considered complete, and so due to the ad hoc nature, it dissolves upon completion of the work. In this case, which was a report, and in this case, that report has turned into hiring a project manager to help us implement what that report suggested. So that body is no longer considered constituted. I'm not sure what the other specific ones are and if I would be able to answer the question for them, but something to consider is that it may be deemed that the work of an ad hoc body is complete and therefore they are no longer part of the list.
Emily.
Yeah, just to echo that, our review, with the exception of the bodies that you will see today, the inactive and defunct bodies, is really focused on the active bodies within the city. So if there is a body that has previously been dissolved, or previously existed but does not currently, then that will not be included in the review that you will receive from us.
Okay. I think for the avoidance of confusion, it would probably be useful if we set some look back window of 18 months, 24 months to say if there's a body that has existed in that window, we could at least note that we acknowledge it existed. It was terminated. I think it would be useful to have just a sentence on how it was dissolved, what the result was, just so it's a question that will come up, I think. And I'm not trying to create unnecessary post hoc work on a committee that doesn't exist anymore. We're not going to go try find commissioners and ask how they felt the process ran. But I do think it's worth mentioning in our report committees that existed, say, in 2024 and 2025. Any other process points? As a process point, just do we have a way to share documents? Yes, Kim.
We have not shared it, but we will. Yes, there will be I believe it's a OneDrive, could possibly be a SharePoint, that is shared with members specifically. Public documents such as the presentation that was or is in process of being delivered to us this evening will be shared publicly on the website. But for anything that is considered sort of an internal working document, like for example, a working draft of a report, there will be a folder created for members. Yes, right now we didn't have any documents, so we haven't shared it out yet.
Cool. And I would note that in my prior work, we have avoided making comments on those docs in the shared drive because it constituted deliberation outside of a meeting, just as a process point. And anyway, thank you. I find it really, really useful to have documents that I can go to the one place.
We
Cool.
may even go so far as to make it so that they are not editable by anyone other than staff in order to prevent that. So if you are not able to, there is probably a reason for that.
The other possibility is chaos. Other process points before we move on. Cool. Let us proceed to some data.
Great, thank you. I am going to, I also want to note that that is not obviously the end of the questions period. There is sure to be questions as we look at the actual findings. Please feel free during these. I think that the best way to go about setting up the process for this is to do the decision making and questions as well with each body as we're presenting on them. There's 6. It should be fairly straightforward, but I am going to go ahead and share that right now. Just a second.
Mika, you are still muted.
Sorry about that. Are these visible to everyone?
I can see them.
Okay, perfect. All right. So as we have explained, that this slide is really to serve as the most simple, I think, or the most straightforward way to go through the decision-making process. At its core, the first question that should be asked with every review is, should this body exist? After that, we delve into it a little bit further. I'd have briefly touched on what the options, or rather the responsibilities of this committee are when reviewing bodies. So starting at the should this body exist question, if the answer to that question is no, the only option is to dissolve or to terminate the body. You'll notice that the next option below that is, or the way to go forward with that is same action as acceptance. That's a little bit confusing, but to delve into it a little bit right now, what that means is that the only 2 kinds of bodies that can be fully dissolved or terminated are those that have been MGL accepted or those that have been created by local ordinance. In order to dissolve those bodies, the recommendation is to either pass an ordinance and say that it is no longer going to be put forth in the body if it comes from a local ordinance, or the other option, if it's been accepted under MGL, the same action to rescind the acceptance is whatever action allowed for the acceptance. So if there was a majority vote in the council for the MGL to be accepted, then there would need to be a majority vote in the council for it to be rescinded. Then with the other option of yes, your choices are a little bit obviously more convoluted. You can either decide to make no change to the body whatsoever if you believe that everything about its functions are according to the enabling legislation and its activities prove that. The other option is to create. As we said, you can either choose to create a new body or establish an ad hoc body, or you can choose to reinstate an inactive body. You can combine 2 or more bodies that serve the same purpose or are basically duplicating their work. And then you can amend it in 3 areas. If you decide to amend the powers, you can choose to either remove or expand them. With meetings, you can choose to either change their date or time in some way or to explicitly state that in their enabling legislation, or you can choose to change the frequency of meetings if it is going to be beneficial to the body in some way. Then with membership, you can choose to either recommend that there are amendments made to the terms of members or to the composition of members. With all of these, I know that Brendan is going to be taking note of any recommendations and I believe creating some kind of report on a month-by-month basis. That way, when it is time to create the full report in November, there's a bit of a track of everything that's been discussed from these meetings. I also want to note that the last option, when it is a MGL accepted ordinance, is a home rule petition that rather than an amendment. Brendan will definitely explain more on the recommendations that come along with that process a little bit further. All right. I will say, I know Brendan gave a little bit of a spoiler into this, but all of the bodies that we are going to be talking about do have one thing in common. They are all inactive. This should make the process of deciding on them fairly straightforward. But what I will also note is that with all of these bodies, it's important to look into exactly why we have strongly, from our findings, seen that the best option forward is really to terminate. Of course, that is something that is up to you as committee members. But this is kind of the structure that we're going to follow, at least for these bodies. I can make no promises about the structure for the way findings will be shown for the other bodies. But if everyone likes this kind of format, I think it would probably be best to proceed with showing the background and our findings in this way. I don't want to sit here and just share, pages and pages of data that don't really make any sense. So for the AIDS Commission, if we look into the background of this, you will see that the AIDS Commission was created by a local ordinance. It is linked in this slide. It was established on November 14th, 1990, and the primary purpose was to educate and mobilize the public, make policy recommendations, and create programs to respond to the growing HIV/AIDS epidemic. The duties were to assess the impact of HIV/AIDS, develop recommendations and propose policies, and initiate and coordinate the enactment of this legislation. They were also permitted to raise money for the use of the commission and hold relevant state or national organization membership. What our findings have been is that there was a defunct purpose and a defunct existence. The purpose itself, the commission was originally established to confront the serious concern regarding the growing impact of the HIV/AIDS epidemic on the community and the city of Somerville and all of its residents. This has been taken directly from any news clips that were available at the time about the creation of the body. As we know, HIV/AIDS is fortunately no longer considered an epidemic. With that being said, there's little to no data specifically on the prevalence of the disease in Somerville, and the very reason behind its creation was to deal with the growing HIV/AIDS epidemic, which is now basically a defunct statement. In terms of the existence, there are no current members whatsoever. The last data that we could find indicated that there were 9 members at one point, which actually also is in counter with its ordinance because the membership requirement was between 13 to 21. There's no data on when the body met last, and there is no data on any recent or past activity from the body. I am going to pause for a second and give everyone a second to read through this. Oh, I think my screen share just stopped again. All right. And I am happy to leave some time for discussion right now if that's the best way to go forward with this.
I would say just for me, I am still finding my feet with this committee. My inclination is, unless it's even more incredibly obvious than this, and this one does seem like a great example to start with, to leave ourselves a little bit of space to maneuver. And I guess the problem is that you're not going to be present to walk us through at the next meeting. But
Unfortunately.
I'm kind of hesitating to take, and they're not binding until we publish the report, but I'm hesitating to put us up for binding votes on recommending that committee multi-member bodies be disbanded on the very first day before we've kind of seen the whole landscape. Is there a reason why it would be a bad idea to leave this on the table as a recommendation and not necessarily just cross them out tonight?
Sorry, I cannot see the screen, but
I don't think there's any reason not to do that. In fact, I might suggest that we keep a running list, if you will, of the space. We can have it's not a straw poll, but we can have sort of a conversation about this, right? Potentially arrive at that conclusion, keep a list of those bodies where that is very likely to be the path forward, take that up in another handful of meetings after we've been able to absorb more information, or potentially even, more towards the end of the work. So I do not see any issue with that path forward. Also, just to note, if we were to make such a recommendation, there is nothing to say that we couldn't pull it back if we learn something new. So either way, very reasonable path forward.
Cool, because and I don't want to burn all the time just talking through this, but my mind is filled with the, shall we say, federal policy changes on public health that are going on now. And while AIDS is currently, we think, it's at least not being actively tracked in Somerville right now, I could see a use for a commission sort of shaped like this one to track the impact of those federal policy changes and how they might be landing in the community and encourage behaviors that are no longer required. Um, anyway, I would like to leave ourselves the space to sort of take a, rather than delete and create a new, to sort of show our work a little bit more than that. So thank you for indulging me there. Derek.
I also appreciate having the space to chew on these a little bit more before we sort of dispense with them. In part because, I don't think this is the one where I'm going to be inclined to dive deep, but there will possibly be other sort of defunct commissions, bodies where I'm very curious about the answers. Like, well, how did it go to be? How did it come to be defunct? Like, what circumstances led to that, right? Because if we can learn something about the sort of final season of these bodies, we can use that for our recommendations to ensure the health of the bodies we intend to keep. So I think for me, I think if we sort of like make a recommendation, it'll feel a little out of sight, out of mind, and I would like to be able to keep these on our mind as we do our work.
Yeah, looking at it in context, this body is required to meet not less than every 10 years. And so there will be, I am certain that the next time a group of citizens comes together like we are coming together, people will be curious what happened to that thing that existed in 2028. Mika.
Absolutely. And I will say that this is definitely the space and time to decide how I think we should proceed. I will also say that this is the first meeting and it is a lot of information that we are coming at you all with. To answer, I guess this wasn't an exact question, but to just touch on a point that was brought up, I think as we go through a few more of these inactive bodies, there is definitely a little bit of information that is available and that we have found in our research as to what exactly happened with these bodies and maybe a bit more of the reasoning as to why. But I do like the way that everyone is already thinking about these and the considerations that are important with this. But I think tabling that, a final decision for right now is definitely a great move forward right now.
Perfect. And just to say, if at any point, open invitation, if I mispronounce anybody's name or you would prefer I use a different name for you, please let me know. I think I may have dropped a syllable on yours, and I apologize if so.
All right. If there are no other questions, are we okay to move to the next body with this? Okay, perfect.
I will say that the screen share is a little bit odd right now.
Yes. Is this better?
Now I see nothing, but I have the PDF up, so I'm a bad audience.
No worries. I apologize. I don't know why it won't let me. All right. Hoping. Is this visible to all?
Amazing to me that we have the two people I would most trust on the meeting.
That is honestly very, very embarrassing for me, I suppose. But let me. I don't know why. There is now 3 tabs open with the PowerPoint, and
if it's helpful, I can try to share from my screen. If
Brendan, if that's okay with you, I would really appreciate that. Sorry about that.
Happy to do it.
Just note the chair was unable to release share, so nobody should be embarrassed.
All right. Are people able to see that?
Yes.
Fantastic.
All right. Yes, we will move to the gang advisory board. So I know I just said that these bodies are all inactive, and that is true to a certain extent. And you are being asked to make a decision of some kind on these bodies, but this body is a little bit different. The Gang Advisory Board is actually one that was officially established, as we said, on August 26, 2004, by a special act. This isn't something that we have really touched on because from our research, there really is no other body that falls under this. But this text still exists in the Massachusetts general laws today. But in 2022, the city of Somerville submitted a home rule petition to repeal or overturn the ordinance. What this means is that the enabling legislation for this body is no longer in place in Somerville, but formally there is still a body that in some form exists. Functionally, it no longer exists, but your recommendation is going to be what is helpful for providing a formal decision on its status within the city. I can explain a little bit further on that, but I'm sure Brennan can also share more about the actual process of special acts and how it was overturned or how it came up to the home rule petition stage. But to get into the background, the body's primary duties are to confer with the Somerville Police Department to implement the gang ordinance, which we know has actually been repealed. So the findings or what was created from the gang ordinance was the body, but it was also a set of rules as to how gangs were going to be, I guess, handled in the city, what the city's plan was. The body was also created to provide recommendations to police personnel and provide policy recommendations on addressing gang issues directly to the mayor. Recent data does indicate that this body no longer addresses an issue that is no longer really in place as heavily in Somerville or was as much of an issue as it was back when it was created in 2004. It also shows that it is being addressed through alternate measures. So what we have found does indicate that as of, I believe it is from 2020, there was a interview that we found where a Somerville crime analyst sat down and senior crime analysts reported that gang activity numbers in the city were shrinking. And the Somerville Police Department's crime report data for that is from 2017 to 2025 indicates that over 60% of criminal activity in the city is nonviolent property crime and has not been directly linked to gang violence or to gang activity. I'm happy to also share the sources for all of this after. They are linked in our speaker notes right now. For the past 6 years, Somerville has also opted to implement restorative justice programs to mitigate gang violence and gang activity amongst high-risk youth. This is a choice that has been made that seems to obviously be working well based on the data that we have shown. The other part of this is that the existence of this body is defunct. There is no record of recent meetings, and the last appointment to the board was made over a decade ago, which was the year of its inception. I want to give a second to speak more on this body and what everyone's thoughts are, but as I stated, essentially this body, the enabling legislation for this body no longer exists or is no longer in power, but the decision of the committee is to make a formal change to the status or the existence of this body in the city.
Brandon, sorry.
Just to give some additional context, as Mahika said, this is a bit of an odd and unique situation. And I will admit that I'm operating largely from memory, but I have had conversations with the city attorney's office, not related specifically to the work of this committee, but that did relate to this specific body. I believe that the reason for the repeal was that there were some constitutionality issues around this ordinance. And so the sort of thing that you're being asked, Mr. Chair, you were slightly prescient. This is a bit of a look back. And so sort of what you're being asked to do about this, if you were to make a recommendation, is to recommend that this not be recreated or reconstituted or reestablished. We could also certainly just treat this as it doesn't really formally exist anymore. The enabling legislation for it has been repealed. The ordinance has been repealed. And so we could simply move on. But to your request that there be a look back, we could treat this as that, essentially.
So I'm looking, I clicked the link in the PDF and I found myself on the Acts of 2004, chapter 327. And it seems that the state passed an act relative to public safety in the city of Somerville, which is remarkable, that they opined on us specifically. But I don't see a link to it being repealed in particular. Do we have that?
So,
Sorry, Derek.
I have that.
Do you?
So city council file numbers. Someone wanted to take this down. I don't have chat functionality, which I understand why, but it does get in the way in cases like this. City council file number 210561 is an order from city council asking for a home rule petition to repeal it. And file number 210710 is the actual home rule petition repealing it.
Okay.
210710.
And 21 is 2021?
These are from 2020, October 2020, September 2020, October 2020. These are not hyphenated file numbers. For whatever reason, these are
Okay,
before they
but in
started that
2020,
convention.
we put in the home rule petition. Do we know whether the state indulged us? Brandon?
yes, Mr. Chair, they did. The specific special act in question is 2022 chapter, or Acts of 2022 chapter 236, which is further regulating public safety.
I think that's a great story. I think that we should tell that story in our report. It's fascinating that they choose to define intimidate as putting in fear for the purpose of compelling or deterring conduct. I don't think that we would write law that way these days.
And we will definitely come to see with some of the upcoming bodies as well that there is a lot of outdated language in these ordinances. That is also something that, maybe not in relation to the inactive bodies, but in general, in the amendment process, if the language itself that is being used is outdated, that is definitely a recommendation that can be put forward to just have a bit of a change to what is being said exactly, because I think it can mean different things.
I am so excited to see what you're talking about.
Absolutely. Right.
Anything else on Gang Advisory Board? Great, let us proceed.
All right. This is the Multicultural Affairs Commission, and we will see very shortly about the outdated language here. But the Multicultural Affairs Commission was established by local ordinance on September 22nd, 2005. It was originally created to serve as an advisory board, compiling and distributing information regarding interracial and intergroup relations, while simultaneously serving as a voice for underrepresented people in city government. The body's duties include eliminating sources of interracial friction and unequal treatment across several areas, such as housing, recreation, law enforcement, etc., assisting private organizations in coordinating and addressing such issues. And as was stated earlier, the overall purpose of this body was to create some kind of space for people to research, look into these, distribute this information, and also to represent underrepresented groups in the city. From what is available publicly on the city website, because this is one of the bodies that does still have a page of their work, what is available on the city website indicates that this body was mostly responsible, or at least was mostly sharing information on language access resources, both in Somerville and the greater Boston area. I believe that there's some information from Dorchester that's shared in there, as well as some information from Brookline, if I'm not mistaken. But a lot of this was language access, so anything with translation and interpretation. But if we move on to our findings, what they indicate are, one, the legislation's language is pretty outdated. It authorizes the body to eliminate sources of unequal treatment and friction, essentially asking volunteer members to complete I would like to believe, pretty difficult task of eradicating systemic or systematic issues through these meetings. It's also a little bit of a disconnect between exactly what is being publicly shared on the website versus what the body's enabling legislation was created to let it do. Over the years, the bulk of the Commission's work has been redirected to city staff and appropriate departments to offer a more comprehensive solution, though. The first program that has been put into place that takes over some of these responsibilities is the Somerville Office of Immigrant Affairs. SOIA's primary areas of work include increasing language and cultural access to resources, programs, and services. They also work very hard to dismantle cultural barriers to public discourse, engagement, and offer translation, interpretation, legal, and other general resources to the city's immigrant and multicultural population, and in general to the general population as well. The second is the Department of Racial and Social Justice, RSJ. This department is expressly focused on identifying and dismantling areas where there are racial and social disparities in the city. They do this through increasing accessibility, community engagement, and developing and recommending policies. In 2021, the city also released its updated long-term comprehensive plan, the Summer Vision 2040, wherein the Summer Vision Committee actually played a very critical role in recommending actions to center equity and inclusivity throughout housing, infrastructure, public space and safety, education, and more. This plan actually expressly speaks about areas where either redlining has been an issue in the city, or in certain instances, what the city can do to put forward a plan for creating spaces for multicultural or people from several different backgrounds to be able to use them, and doesn't limit access because of a person's racial or cultural background. Other important points to note are that the available information on the body's activities indicate that it primarily shared, as I said, language and cultural resources, and that the last recorded meeting was on April 24th, 2008. What is available online and also from our research indicates that the last membership appointment was made over a decade ago, which also kind of aligns with the time when the body was first created, and there is no other current information on the body's activities.
I will just say as we go through these, we don't need to go into it now, but I find myself curious how it is that a body could just exist with nobody in it for so long. I see why whoever, and I suspect you're in the room, whoever put this in the charter, I suspect, I see why you put it in. Seems like important work we're doing. Any other comments on this?
A question. In your research, when you say last recorded meeting, did you happen to look into any of the substance of these, like final meetings? Were you able to find agendas or minutes, or simply evidence that a meeting had happened?
That is a great question. And the answer to that is allegedly there was a meeting that was supposed to happen. It was on the calendar, April 24th, 2008. If you go to the city calendar, it should say that there is a Multicultural Affairs Commission meeting. There is no record of an agenda or minutes on there, though. So I will say that that is as far as the indication of the meeting existing that I can find, or that we have been.
The silence speaks volumes.
Good enough. Thank you.
I think that's actually a really important lesson learned that we will be able to surface here, is that it is possible for such a reasonable, if dated, statement of it, mission to be laid out, and then it just doesn't happen. I think that's important for folks to sit with when they pass these ordinances and empower these committees. Other comments? All right, let us proceed.
Okay, so moving into the last half of these inactive bodies. First, starting with Municipal Athletics Facilities Commission. This commission was established by ordinance in 2007, linked there. Its main duties were to operate, manage, maintain, and staff the Dilboy Memorial Stadium and any other facilities that were designated by the mayor and approved by the city council. In this case, that included the funding, the issuance of permits, authorization of concessions, and leasing or permitting of these facilities. As you see on the right-hand side, these duties are currently being fulfilled by the Department of Parks and Recreation. Dilboy Memorial Stadium and other fields and facilities are operated and maintained by the department, which also manages the permitting side and even the concessions for Dilboy Stadium. In terms of the funding arm, which you can see that bottom left corner, the commission did have a revolving fund. Currently, the Dilboy Stadium generates revenue through the rentals and permits, and the Department of Parks and Recreation works with the mayor for grants, budgeting, and expenditure. There are no records of recent meetings that I could find in my research, and the last appointment was made over 15 years ago. So largely for this body, it seems that our research indicates that the department is doing the work here, and this is the case of a redundancy in the city. It's pretty straightforward. Are there any questions on this body? I tried to lay it out, and you can see I've linked sources if you're interested in any of those bullet points as well.
Derek.
Yeah, so I'm catching very quickly language here that looks like maybe this was created to satisfy a contract obligation. So I think we need to understand that if we're gonna, maybe we don't need to understand it, but we need to get someone with more of a legal hat to review it. Because I see this reference to devise and direct policy initiative relative to something, agreement entered by the State Department of Conservation and the city. So I don't, yeah, we should be careful.
And if I can respond to that. So I agree this is something we should look into a little bit more. I'm certainly not a legal analyst by any means. I can give my baseline understanding, which is that the Department of Conservation and Recreation owns the land that Dilboy Stadium is on, but the city is entitled to manage the stadium itself. This should be further clarified, certainly. So that's something that I can go back and work on in order to understand kind of where that leaves us. But it is worth noting that this commission hasn't met in nearly a decade. So I think that speaks to the fact that the department is currently taking on that role. But again, should be further clarified by somebody with legal expertise if that's necessary, certainly.
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth a ping to legal to ask if we are required. Like, I would be shocked, but if we're actually required by our contract with the state to have this commission, then no time like the present to reinstitute it. Other comments on this? This is fascinating. Let us proceed.
Okay, and that takes us to the Recreation and Youth Commission. Similar kind of work in a way in that it relates to the Department of Parks and Recreation. This commission was established in 2003. It does exist in our Code of Ordinances, although the ordinance only includes appointment information and does not include a purpose, powers, or duties section. It is also mentioned in MGL to some extent, and you can see that below. The description or the information provided by the MGL is very broad. It essentially says that a recreation commission can use land or buildings that are already owned and have been previously appropriated by the city to promote recreation, play, sports, and physical education. And the Recreation Commission's own page on the city website simply states that the youth branch is meant to create a curriculum that encourages community awareness in the city's young people. Moving over to the right side of the slide here, we can see that the Parks and Recreation Commission provides year-round recreational services for the youth and adults of the city. And it also is responsible for the community sports programs for the city. So by and large, according to the information, like I said, that is very broad, but listed in the enabling legislation, the Parks and Rec department essentially is managing any function that the Recreation and Youth Commission had. The last recorded meeting that I could find on the city's website was from 2017, and the last appointment to the commission was made over 20 years ago. So it's been a long time since this commission has been active, and it seems that, similar to the last body, the Parks and Recreation Department functionally has taken over the duties that it once fulfilled.
That's a really interesting evolution, and it makes a lot of sense, actually, that the city would start off with a volunteer commission and then eventually realize it deserved professionalization. I think we might find a lot of that. That's actually a very happy ending to a commission like this one. Other comments on recreation and youth? All right, let us proceed to pilot.
Okay. And the Pilot Advisory Task Force is a little bit different than the rest of them. In this case, the Advisory Task Force was a working group of sorts. So it essentially had a charge, which was to create a report with recommendations, and it completed its charge. To get into a little bit more detail, you can find this in the city's ordinances. It was established in 2021, and its purpose was to create a report with recommendations for a more equitable and consistent pilot program. And in case anybody is unfamiliar, pilot just stands for payment in lieu of taxes. So there are organizations within the city of Somerville, and somebody can correct me if I'm using this language incorrectly, but that are exempt from paying property taxes, I believe, or taxes that are otherwise mandated by the city for other organizations or property owners. Their duty, again, was to file this report with the city clerk, the mayor, and the city council, which they did in the spring of 2025. So their work has been completed. The task force no longer exists, essentially, and their last recorded meeting, again, was in 2025. So in this case, the suggested action is still to dissolve it, but it just looks a little bit different, or the reasoning is a little bit different than the last 5 bodies that we previously reviewed.
Comments or questions on that one? I would note for the committee that this is our fate.
Sorry, I do have a question.
Yes.
Maybe when I was reading, my listening stopped being so good. So this was an ad hoc task force, or is it somehow not? Is it an anomaly in some way that it should have been, but it is?
So unlike an ad hoc task force, it is legislated in our ordinances, which is why it did not automatically cease to exist once it completed its work. Kim, if you have anything to add on, please. But that's why action from this committee is necessary, because it does still exist in our ordinances, despite the fact that its work has been completed.
And that work, and
Is the
it's clear to
production
you
of
in
recommendations.
sorry, yes. It's clear to you in the read of the ordinance that that work is meant to be a one-time thing, not a recurring thing?
That is what my reading of the ordinance indicates, yes.
Okay, thanks. Kim, maybe you have something to add.
I'll chime in just a bit, yes, to say the reason that this became an ordinance is that it was a function of the city council. So it really portrays this interesting juxtaposition of the executive and the legislative body, where the executive is the person, quite frankly, it is an individual in that case, who has the authority to enter into these agreements and to negotiate them as they see fit. Those negotiations could be a one-to-one with the mayor and, a representative of whatever entity is subject to pilot. And the city council really wanted there to be more of a say in guiding those negotiations. So this report was, in effect, a one-time thing in order to get community feedback. There was a counselor who served on the committee. There was a school committee member who served on the committee to really help sort of push the executive in a direction that would enable the city, quite honestly, to recoup more than it has been. And this current administration, I will speak just a bit for that and say it has received the recommendations, has a lot of great things to say about them, and is beginning the process of these negotiations currently. So it is my view that there is no longer a need for this to be an ongoing body. It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to try to have a group just continually making recommendations as various negotiations are ongoing. Hopefully we can get the city to a better place of being able to get some in some cases money, but in some cases sort of in kind, right, options from our community entities who are not required to pay property taxes.
I'm looking at the report and I see that what is in Legistar, the PDF that's linked there, it still has red lines in it. So I think I have a goal for us to have a final when we put it in the city council agenda. Okay. So despite the fact that this one is incredibly clear that they were like asked by ordinance to do a thing, they did the thing and they don't meet anymore, I still think that I would like to hold off on taking any particular votes just to get my arms around a framework here. This is complex stuff, and I really appreciate the diligence that done to get us this far. Any other kinds? There we go. I guess that moves us to the discussion of when we shall have our next meeting.
Yes, and just to quickly start us off here, what this last slide will typically look like is just, for lack of a better word, a homework page. So this is where we will try to link any enabling legislation for bodies that we expect to review in our next meeting. Again, so you guys have time to familiarize yourselves with it. There's an easy kind of point to come back to, as well as anything that's just important that we need to flag. So this is kind of the structure that we're looking to go ahead and establish moving forward. In this case, for the first meeting, it's a little bit sparse. We hope to, I think we've decided that group one, which is essentially our PPZ board, Planning Board, Urban Design Commission, Zoning Board of Appeals, and Historic Preservation Committee, is going to be a good, straightforward group of bodies to start us off with. Just according to the responses I received in our commissioner questionnaire, and their enabling legislation in the way that they currently function. So we've linked their enabling legislation there, and our only action item, really, apart from anything that comes up in discussion here, is to review this legislation ahead of the next meeting. But please, Mihika and Brendan, feel free to add on anything that I missed there.
I would go with Mihika first here.
Thank you, Chair. I also, a very quick request, Brendan, if you would be able to go back to the committee timeline slide really quickly. I just want to give a very quick overview to assist in planning for the next meeting. I think it's important to note that those 6 months that are in the middle, and obviously our April meeting has been, I think we've gotten a lot of work and a lot of information that we've a little bit bombarded you all with, but I think this is a great starting point, and I appreciate this, understanding of how to think over it before. This was actually something we discussed in our planning too, that might be a possibility, that the meeting itself holds time to just go through and review findings and discuss findings, and the actual decisions are something that are made maybe in the follow-up meeting before starting the next group of bodies. I will also say that a little bit of a spoiler as to what the group 2 bodies are. They are all similar in the fact that they have either state jurisdiction, or, as the PPZ ones are a little bit as well, they are required in the city for some reason, or they have very well established processes in the city. It is, if it is helpful, and to keep up with the timeline, I would make a broad suggestion that it might be helpful to look at both, especially since our information on group 2 bodies is actually pretty limited, because all of the information from liaisons is primarily that this is a city, or a state legislated, or a body with state jurisdiction. So all of their work is done by the state. There is not as much of a decision to make there in terms of removal, or really any big major changes. But I do think that might be helpful, if I know we can't account for everyone's scheduling, but just to also ease Emily's workload, kind of an idea of exactly what those 6 months might look like in terms of which bodies are included and which are not. And that is my thought, but I'm happy to let everyone else decide, as I unfortunately will not be part of the process anyway.
Brendan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will note that there is, if I remember correctly, on the agenda, there is a placeholder for unfinished business, which was, of course, empty today. You will see that pending recommendations on these 6 inactive bodies will appear on the next agenda and any subsequent agenda until recommendations are made. So in case there is any concern that there will, as Derek said, out of sight, out of mind, I will ensure that that does not happen.
So I think, Derek.
Yeah, so I think what I'm hearing is a suggestion that we're going to sort of work through the corpus of bodies in these chunks. And the suggestion that we could look at each of them, come up with some preliminary recommendations, put those all on deck for us to revisit after we've gone through them all. I do not think that's how I would prefer to go about this. I think our decision making of those bodies we see early will end up being very different than the decision making of the bodies we see later. I have questions about what data we're collecting on these things, that I think if we can answer those quickly, meaning in the earlier period of our work, gives us more opportunity to make adjustments without running out of time to get answers to questions and do research. So my sort of inclination would to do more of a breadth first analysis, less of a taking bites out of the total set of bodies analysis. Having said that, I had some questions about the research, which I'd love to get to, but I think before I launch into questions, I just sort of let my comments sit and see if the other members have thoughts on that.
Yeah, I'll say for my part, I completely agree that the way we're approaching this is the way that I would approach it if I was asked to do the work of preparing for these meetings. If the shoe was on the other foot, this is exactly how I would have approached it. So it is without any shade that I think that it's going to take a couple of minutes for me to come to a formulation like another possibility. As I have spoken with members of the community, people who serve on various committees and commissions, particularly the ones that are still constituted that struggle, there are some that's where my attention has been with the committees that have trouble making quorum or who have trouble feeling impactful in their role. That's where I think that it'll be hard to give those the dignity that they deserve if they only come up at one meeting and they only get one slide. And I'm not sure what to recommend, but I do think that usually the chair works with the staff liaison to make agendas. And so perhaps I could work with you, Brendan, over the coming weeks to come up with a way on the agenda to figure out what we think are the simple questions and answer them, and leave most of the time for discussing a couple of more substantive, challenging things, and then send us off with homework to do research and think. I saw Emily put up a hand first there.
Sorry, I do actually think that Mahiko put up her hand first, but I guess still like actively formulating my thought. But one thing that I will say is when we put our groupings together for bodies, we did try to take into account that some bodies will require more discussion and more action than other bodies. And we did try to put bodies that would require less discussion toward the top of our list. So that's really what we will probably start off with. And this next question is more of a thought, some maybe context that may be helpful unless I'm misinterpreting, but one of the reasons that we've decided to work in sections and that we've kind of oriented our process to sections within groups is because that's how our data analysis is taking place. We're kind of working group by group in parallel with the progress of this committee, if that makes sense. So we're actively coding transcripts as the work of this committee will continue. So we may have kind of data findings to offer for the first couple of groups, whereas the groups 11 and 12, it'll be kind of a significant amount of time before we've gone and completed that coding and have findings and really meaningful conclusions to present. So in that way, I guess providing a holistic overview of bodies may be more challenging if that was the thought process there. But feel free to correct me if I've misinterpreted anything there. But just additional context on our end, what that data collection and analysis process is looking like for the various bodies.
Appreciate that. Mahika.
Absolutely. I want to echo everything that Emily has said as well, that I think for us as well, our process with interviews, our process with data analysis, data collection has really been structured around what we think would have been a fairly straightforward way to look at this. And I also want to note that I completely agree and echo the statement earlier about whether or not each of the, I guess, overviews of the body are going to kind of be a small chunk of the body's activities and, really delving in deep. The way that the inactive bodies that have been shown at this presentation have been structured, where there's background and there's findings, and it is really just one slide with a very summarized amount of information, is not what the rest of the analysis and the findings will look like. I don't want to speak for anyone specifically because I know that Emily and Brendan are going to be the two taking the lead on it, but just from being on the data collection and data analysis side of it, there's a lot more information that will be provided to you with each of these bodies, even if that analysis is being created on a group by group basis. And the reason for that, more than anything else, and the reason why the inactive bodies might not portray it as specifically, is because there's unfortunately no one to speak to about those bodies because they haven't met in close to a decade. Some of them haven't, there's just no information as to the work that they've actually completed. Whereas on the other end, with all of the remaining bodies from groups 1 to 12, there is plenty of information. There are people that I think would be very excited to actually come and share their own thoughts on it, if that's ever something that can be considered. I know as I was conducting my interviews, that was something that came up with liaisons and people that are able to delve in more deeply into specifically the relationship between the city and these bodies and what role that they serve. But I will just make that point that the way that these inactive bodies data has been shown right now is definitely not the same formatting throughout the process. This was a little bit more just to kind of give a starting point of bodies that really there isn't a ton of information in, so they can kind of be looked at fairly easily. But obviously, I think it is the best choice forward to kind of sit on it and let that information digest before making it.
That sounds great to me. I want to hear what Brandon has to say and then what Derek has to say, and I also want to respect people's time and make sure we have time to schedule our next get-togethers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What a timely thing to say. I did want to highlight sort of the more practical and logistical aspect of this, which is that unfortunately this body does have a very limited amount of time and a very limited number of opportunities to meet and discuss. And so part of the reason that this timeline was laid out the way that it is to keep in mind that the bulk of this work, particularly the research and the broader overview, has already been accomplished by staff in preparation for the work of the committee, which is to review the information that is been collected by staff and then make the recommendations. So I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page with regard to that, and so that again, as Emily said, just making sure that I'm not misinterpreting what the ask was. But just want to make sure that it's clear that there has been a very thorough process over the last several months to review the various boards and commissions, or rather multiple member bodies, and to really do all of the work necessary to prepare to share the information that this body needs to make the recommendations that are required by the charter.
Excellent. I really appreciate that. Derek.
Well, so I'm going to try to be a little more to the point just for the sake of time. Emily, Mega, you had a set of quantitative questions that you asked of these liaisons of the bodies, as well as an interview and presumably a script you used for those interviews. Is that correct? I saw head nods, which is a sufficient answer for me.
Yes.
My concrete request is, would you please share them with us?
I will really quickly respond. Just to clarify this and to make sure that I'm not misinterpreting this as well, both the quantitative and qualitative questions were all structured in the same questionnaire. It was formatted as an interview. All of the questions were asked, and it's actually more so that the questions that can be turned quantitative were turned quantitative. ABC questions, 1, 2, Likert scale questions. And in terms of the actual transcripts for the interviews, I will say that is something that is currently in the process of still being parsed through. And I'm not exactly sure what the procedure is in terms of sharing data, but I'm happy to let.
So just to clarify, I'm asking for the script. I'm asking for what are the set of questions that you were asking.
Itself.
Yes. And I understand that you have not yet sent out questionnaires. You mentioned forms, Microsoft Forms, to commissioners or members of these bodies. It depends when we meet next, but that is the type of thing that I would very much like this body to have a hand in reviewing and seeing and potentially influencing. So maybe that could be an agenda item for our next meeting, and I would request, and perhaps we should make it a body order if necessary, that we not send that out until we've had a chance to review it.
I saw a hand go up and down, but then Brandon, you came in last.
If I may, Mr. Chair, I do want to highlight again that given the very short runway that we have to work with, I would recommend strongly against getting too involved in the sort of staff work of this, particularly with regards to that questionnaire. But I'll certainly defer to the members of the body on that.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's reasonable that we can accomplish this without making it overly complex. I mentioned earlier that we would create a shared folder. This feels like the perfect thing to put in there first. And I think that perhaps a process that might be more efficient than having a protracted conversation in the next meeting is that the members can share feedback with staff, and staff can create an updated version if necessary that incorporates members' feedback. And then by the time the questionnaires go out, we have accomplished that thing. And I don't think that we need to necessarily do that in a meeting, right? For one single member to email staff or to have a phone call or a Zoom, whatever it is, with staff is not a violation of the open meeting law because we're not deliberating and we're not sharing in a shared document. We're each providing feedback separately. I think that there's no reason that we can't accomplish that.
Yeah, completely agreed on that. Just to say, given that staff are not members of the committee, there's that path there. So I think that any of us who are interested in the survey questions should probably feel empowered to reach out. I would love it if I could take a look at them. I can't promise that I'll put anything in an email. And then that should absolutely not hold things up. I think that if we're interested in that, we should be able to get our feedback in within a week after we see the questions. And then, yeah, I don't want to be in a position of second guessing the data gathering here. Derek.
Yeah, so I guess coming back then just to put a make sure that the requests are clear is that we request to share the script that was used for interviewing of liaisons and a request to share the questionnaire that is intended to go out to commissioners and a friendly request to please give us a few business days opportunity to review and provide feedback on that questionnaire before it's sent out. I hope that's not too much to ask. If many months, I'm hoping a few days isn't too much. What I don't want to be in a situation of really wishing we asked a bunch of questions that weren't included and having to do a second round of questionnaires for commissioners.
Yeah,
That I think would be much more expensive.
And for context, I know that both Derek and I have been approached in the halls, so to speak, by various active members of the community to say, you're on that body, you got to get this information in. So really, we're looking to make sure that the questions elicit those answers. At least I am.
One final question for, I don't know whether it's Mika or Emily. You mentioned that you had questions that were reviewed by and approved by the city clerk. Were there any questions you wished to ask which were removed based on feedback?
Please go ahead.
Here, I can start us off. I think that we came to a pretty solid and holistic or comprehensive set of questions. I think at most it was, I mean, certainly there was an editing process and questions removed, but more than anything, I think we just tried to rework framing of questions to get to the core of what we were looking for. So I don't think I personally can think back to a question that had been permanently removed that I wish that we had asked.
I will absolutely echo that. And I will say that in general, if anything, what we have found is that in our interviews that most of them would regularly go to an hour plus, and they were completed in groups, but I think that grouping actually allowed people to speak more freely, and they were able to sometimes, I don't want to say be affected by each other's responses in that way, but they were able to think back to ideas that they might not have previously shared about the boards and commissions that they are a liaison for. And it really allowed a lot of space for recommendations from them and their direct influence or not influence, their direct work with the boards and commissions. They also were able to advise on good commissioners to really share feedback as well. And I think that the biggest thing that we've learned from the question process is that actually having a set questionnaire, as much as it's great for data collection and allows for a very standard amount of information to come back, is something that has deferring feedback based on what the establishment or what kind of body it is. The Board of Assessors might not have exact responses to certain things that are relevant to something like the Council on Aging. So that's definitely something that we've seen. But I think that in general, our process was very, I guess, in depth, and it allowed people to share as much information as they can. And I'm looking forward to sharing these with you and also getting feedback on the commissioners.
Great.
All
Thanks.
right.
Thanks for that diversion, Chris. You can go back to scheduling if you like.
Not at all the diversion. I felt myself as we thought about, I love the idea of bringing people in to talk to us, but with something like 8 meetings before we have to deliver a report, there is no possible way. With that, how do we schedule our next meeting, folks? And then
Mr. Chair, so the recommendation that I have for you is to begin on a cadence of monthly meetings, and then as time progresses, if it becomes clear that there is entirely too much work to accomplish on a cadence of monthly meetings, perhaps moving to twice a month, or even if necessary in October in advance of the preparation of the report, perhaps even 3 meetings in the space of a month. At current, my recommendation would be to meet approximately every 4 weeks. And so the next date that I had identified would be May 20th, Wednesday, May 20th.
Fortunately, I will not be able to make the 20th. Would it make sense to do another doodle, or can we just do it live with the group of us?
I don't believe that there's any necessity to clearly set the specific date at this meeting. I simply recommended that as a date that I had identified. And as you noted earlier, the setting of the agenda and scheduling of the meeting is something that the chair can work out with the staff liaison if necessary.
Let me suggest this, and it is a suggestion. I'm interested in people's feedback. We all have some homework to do. By we all, I mean mostly Derek and I, who are new to this. You folks have been working on this for months. And I agree that our next meeting should be in approximately 4 weeks. I think we will probably accelerate after that just to get through the bulk of material. I will take on meeting with the staff liaison to work out an agenda that we're both confident will cover all the things, and we'll work out a time that most people can be here sometime in the second, third week of May range. Anybody is absolutely welcome to reach out to me directly with feedback on the agenda, input on the agenda, things that you think ought to be on there. We will not deliberate. I'll just be taking input on that. And then we'll publish an agenda prior to the next meeting, probably scheduling with some sort of doodle poll, because that's how we do things now. Are folks comfortable with that as an approach to our next meeting?
That sounds great.
Excellent. This is really, really exciting. Any closing comments before we let ourselves go get some dinner?
Yeah, one, I think now knowing sort of what the nature of the presentation from the city staff looks like, I have much more of an appetite to do some pre-reading because I think it'll also help our conversations go more quickly, but that somewhat depends on everyone being willing to do pre-reading so as to save ourselves from having to have everything recited back to us. So speaking for myself, that's definitely an approach that I'm very comfortable with and generally prefer. If that ends up being unanimous, then maybe we can sort of all make that commitment that we're going to pre-read, and then we can get right to questions for the most part.
My goal, completely supporting that, because I was frantically Googling as we were talking just to try to keep up. My goal would be to put out a fairly detailed agenda, something like a week ahead of time, so that we could read the enabling legislation, review minutes if the minutes are available, that sort of thing. Would that meet your need?
Yes, I was thinking mostly in terms of the presentation that Emily and Mahika provided. Like, I don't It's on me totally. I know it was attached to the meeting, but I didn't sit down and try looking at it until 30 minutes before. I don't know how far in advance it was made available, but a few days would be sufficient for me to have time with it.
A couple of days, I will go deep as well, and then I will be more informed for the conversation. Any other closing comments before we break? I will just say thank you to everybody. This is absolutely fantastic. I am thrilled and honored to get to work with you, and I'm looking forward to the work we're going to do together. So on adjournment,
Mr. Chair, I'm happy to call the roll on adjournment.
excellent. Let us do that. Mr. Rice, back to you on adjournment. Just say yes.
My apologies. I thought Brendan was going to call the roll, but yes,
Oh.
I'm supportive of adjourning.
So on adjournment, Derek Rice votes yes.
Yes.
Clerk Wells
Yes.
and Chair Dwan.
Yes.
All right, we are adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank
Good night,
you. Good night.